I picked up this tank for £5 from a recycling centre. Come with me on the journey as we transform it into this beautiful paludarium, complete with flora, fauna, and a small water feature. When I first picked up the tank, it was honestly a mess, and it was quite a daunting task because I've actually never built something like this before. So the first thing I had to do was clean out the tank. First of all, by taking out all of the stuff that had been left on the inside, and then removing the thermometer from the outside and scraping what was left over off the glass. And the next step I was super nervous for. I needed to do a water test to make sure that this tank could actually hold water because I picked it up for £5. And there were two key factors as to why I was quite nervous for this. The first one being that I don't know if the table that it was on would have been able to support the weight of the tank full of water, so I decided to measure it up and build a support beam in the middle of the table, just in case the table broke, destroying the whole tank. And the second reason being that if the tank did break, or the water came leaking out, I live on the second story in some flats, so that would be downstairs' problem. Either way, I held my breath and began filling up the tank. I was going to be doing this leak test for 2 days just so that I could be super sure that no water was leaking out of the tank. I also want to apologise if you keep seeing me change outfit throughout this video. Right now I'm in my pyjamas. I work 2 jobs, so it's very difficult to actually find the time to do this. In fact, this project took me 3 months in total to finish, but once the tank was up to a desired level, I then just marked where the top of the water was coming up to, just so that I had a way to track whether or not water was leaking out of the tank. And after the 2 days were up, much to my delight, we did not have any leaks from the tank, so the next step was just to get the tank all cleaned down so it was looking presentable and ready to start working on. It looks so much cleaner without having all of that mineral buildup and the white stuff kind of all over it, but it's looking much better now. And with yet another outfit change, I finished building the bootleg support beam, popped it under the table, stood on the table as a bit of a stress test to see if it could hold my weight, and then put the clean tank back up on top. Now it was time to actually start building things for the tank. Because I wanted a water feature, I had to get some egg crate light diffuser and an aquarium pump that I could hide in the background of the tank. So I built the housing and held it together with cable ties, and then surrounded the pump with filter foam. This should work like any normal aquarium filter, creating a safe space for beneficial bacteria, which will improve the quality of the water. I then put this in the tank and using aquarium grade silicone, held it there for the next 2 days just to make sure it was secure. I then put the tank on its side in preparation for something that I was very nervous for. I began filling up the housing with all of the filter foam, and then that was followed by a few pieces of cardboard to block out any other entrances. Now, the reason that I'm doing this is because I'm planning on spray foaming the background onto this tank. So the way that I started doing that was by first adding some cork bark, which I wanted to use as almost like a centerpiece to the background, and then I planned to spray foam around this. I then got to work adding the spray foam and any other decorations to the background of the tank. And by the end, it was looking like I was going to have to trust the process. As the tank didn't come with a lid, I very roughly sketched out and cut a lid from a clear piece of PVC board, and then created stands to put the light on, and I also cut out a small area that would be used for ventilation, and then siliconed some mesh to that area. The lid was definitely not perfect, but it was going to do the job. I then added in a branch cascading down from the right hand side, which I spray foamed in place and then tacked in using Gorilla Glue. And here is how the tank is looking now. It's not perfect and it's very much still in the trust the process phase, but we're slowly making progress. After the spray foam had cured, it was time to start shaping the background so it didn't look like such a blobby mess. I did this by using a Stanley knife and cutting back parts of the spray foam. I also bought a wire brush drill bit, But it turned out, because of the branch that I'd added into the middle, I couldn't fit the drill in, so I just had to do all of this by hand, either picking it off or cutting through it with the Stanley knife. I also want to point out this is not a quick process at all, but it's super essential for a few reasons. The first one being it makes the spray foam look more natural, almost like rock, which is the intended goal. And I plan to add silicone over the top of this, and it won't stick properly if it still has the smooth surfaces from the spray foam. Here you can see how much spray foam I actually removed by hand. It did take a long time, but the tank was looking so much better for it. Now it was time to start bringing the background to life. I plan to do this by breaking down a brick of cocoa fiber and crushing it up into a fine dust, and applying this to the background using silicone, whilst also sprinkling in some areas of sphagnum moss. Once prepared, I carefully tipped the tank onto its side once again and began covering the spray foam with aquarium grade silicone and then dotting in areas of cocoa fiber and sphagnum moss. And after not too long at all, I ran out of silicone. I used a lot for this, but I did manage to do the back and one of the sides. There was only one more side left to do. So after picking up another tube of silicone and blowing cocoa fiber absolutely everywhere, I got to work applying the silicone, cocoa fiber and sphagnum moss to the last side of the tank. I do want to point out, this is something brand new to me. I've never built a paludarium before, and there's a lot of things that I would have done differently, so don't take anything that I say or do as advice. Something that I wish that I had done on this background was include plant pots, so that I could have plants growing out of the background. But nonetheless, the tank was looking way better at this point, and it was time to start clearing out all of the cocoa fiber and sphagnum moss that was loose and fell off. I did this by first reaching in and pushing all of it into a corner and then just scooping it out with a small bucket, although it's pretty difficult because the tank is quite deep, so it's hard to put my hand all the way down. I then followed that up by just taking in a hoover and sucking up what was remaining. Once done, the tank was looking way more presentable and the background portion of the project was pretty much done, so it was time to start working on the lower side of the tank. I then put together this rather ugly false bottom, but it's fine because this was going to be hidden. It was just to separate the land and the water section. Next, I spent an embarrassingly long time just throwing wood and stones around in what would be the water section to try and get something that I felt happy with. I'd ran out of spray foam. Well, I say ran out. I bought 3 bottles of spray foam, 2 of which broke, so I had to do this without spray foam. And once I was pretty happy with it, I took it all back out. I then began putting in aquarium filter foam just to soften the weight of the stones slightly on the bottom of the tank, and then began filling in all of the gaps from the stone with more filter foam. The reason for this is eventually when I put life into the aquarium side of this tank, I don't want them to be able to crawl under the false bottom and me never see them again. As I didn't have any spray foam to hand anymore, I decided to hold all of this together with Gorilla Glue. And something that seems to be becoming a theme of this video, another thing that I was quite nervous for, the big piece of wood has not been underwater for a very long time, so it's probably quite dry, and to my knowledge, I remember it floating when I first had it in an aquarium. So in the back of my mind this entire time, when I finally fill this thing up with water, I was quite scared that the wood was going to float, pull down all of the stones, and even potentially crack the bottom of the tank. Another thing that had my tummy turning in a funny way was the cork bark at the front of what is about to be the drainage layer Cork bark is notoriously floaty, and I thought again, when I fill this up with water, even though I've siliconed it down, if it did come up, it would pull down all of the rocks and also destroy the land section, which would completely destroy the bottom side of the tank. Either way, I began putting together the drainage layer by first adding leaker balls on top of the egg crate light diffuser to act as a drainage layer for moisture to fall through the soil, through the leaker balls, and then down into the bottom water section of the tank. Then on top of the drainage layer, I added a screen mesh as a divider between the soil and the leaker. On top of the mesh, I then added activated carbon. This is to help keep the ecosystem healthy. And then on top of that, I added a mix of all-purpose compost, cocoa fibre, and aqua soil. And it was at this point where the tank was really starting to take shape. After the month or so that has been put into it so far, it was finally starting to look like a real paludarium. So now, with only the aquatic side of the paludarium left, it was time to start working on hiding away the filter sponge. I did this by taking some stones, applying Gorilla Glue to the back of them, and then applying them to the taller areas where the filter sponge was visible. On the spots where I didn't have stones that were the right size to fit, I began applying aquarium grade silicone to the sponge and began covering those with gravel. Following that, I began to add the substrate layer, but very quickly realizing that I hadn't added a nutrients layer below this, so I quickly scooped all of the gravel to the side, added a layer of aqua soil, and then scooped the gravel back over on top. And at this point, the bottom section of the paludarium was pretty much done. There were a few small jobs that needed taking care of, but they didn't take too long at all, such as removing silicone from the front of the glass that got stuck there when I was doing the background, so I just got a plastic tipped razor scraper and began removing these, along with applying some Gorilla Glue to the large rock where the water feature was going to be, and sticking down the tube from the pump where the water was going to flow. Something that I wasn't super happy with was the sides of the tank. Although you can't really see them in the videos, they just didn't look great because the cork bark and the expanding foam, and you could see slightly under the water and land dividing section. So I decided to kind of, I would say masking tape, but I used fragile tape because I didn't have any masking tape to hand. I decided to block off an area and actually spray paint the sides of the tank just so that they were fully blocked out. And when I did it on the side where the pump and the filter and all of that type of stuff was, I decided to leave a bit of a gap just so I could see how the filter and the heater and everything were getting on. And I'm honestly so glad that I decided to do this. Not only did it make the tank just have a much more professional kind of finished feel to it, but it also prevented any light seeping in or out from the sides of the tank, and just made everything look more direct and intentional, which meant there was only one piece left missing from the equation. The part that I thought could destroy all of the work that I've made up until this point, and that was adding the water into the paludarium. What a relief. The tank did not fall to pieces when I put the water in. The cork bark stayed firmly secure to the rocks, and the big piece of wood did not start floating. I even turned the pump on just so that you could get an idea of what the water feature was going to look like when the tank was done. I can't describe the feeling of the weight that was taken off my shoulders at this very point in the project. And to give the water section of the tank a good start, I added filter active, quick start, and aquasafe to ensure that the beneficial bacteria was doing well. But little did I know that this small success would lead to my next problem. The humidity levels in the tank were way too high. So I hopped onto Google and did some research in the hopes to find a solution. which led me to making 2 purchases from Amazon. Firstly, I bought a new heater so that I could more accurately control the water temperature. And secondly, I bought a small fan to try and regulate the humidity. So first, I installed the new heater, followed by placing the fan on top of the air vent that we created into the lid. Now all that was left to do was leave the tank and wait and see if this would fix the issue. And I can thankfully say, after just a few short hours, the mist was finally starting to clear up. I can't believe that worked as well as it did. And finally, after all of the time that I've spent building this tank, it was finally time to bring it to life, or bring life to the tank. Starting with the aquatic section, I added some anubias and some crypts. I picked these specifically because they're slow growing plants and they deal well with low light, making them perfect for the lower water level that we had in the water section of this tank. I then used some moss which I locally sourced to hide away the tube for the water feature, and then applied some more moss to the rock below to control the speed and the direction the water travels. Now, some of you watching may have to forgive me for this. I can't remember the name of the plants that I added into the tank, and I don't really want to just refer to them as this plant or that plant, and I don't want to do some loose research and get the names wrong, so I apologize for not knowing the names. Although maybe you could enlighten me in the comments. Show me some aquatic plants, I could probably tell you the name. Show me some terrestrial plants, and I'm pretty clueless. Either way, to be my own hypocrite and using the terms this and that for the plants, I added the largest plant I had into the back left-hand side of the tank, almost as like a centerpiece, and to provide some cover for any life that inhabits the tank. And whilst on the topic of providing cover, I also decided to add a few rounded river pebbles as hardscape in the land section of the tank, just again so that there was more hiding spaces for any of the inhabitants. Following this, I added this ivy-esque looking plant, apologies again, to the back right hand side of the tank with the hopes of that as this grows, it will start to grow up the back of the tank and begin climbing its way to the top. The next plant I added had these beautiful red jeweled leaves, and I'd seen other people building paludariums on YouTube add these to their tank, so when I saw it in the shop, I knew that I had to put this in here. Which was then followed by this incredible looking green and white plant, which I popped at the back next to the ivy. And finally, I added this smaller, almost succulent looking plant into the foreground. They say you can't put a price on life, but if you're a springtail, the price of your life is $7.99. All joking aside, springtails are such an important part of a paludarium. If you're ever building something like this, I urge you to add springtails. They consume decaying organic matter, they'll prevent dangerous mold outbreaks, and they naturally cycle nutrients back into the soil. They're an essential part of any cleanup crew. And at this point, the tank has already undergone a massive transformation and looks incredibly different. The only thing really left to do to make it feel like a real forest floor was to begin adding some leaf litter. And last, but definitely not least, it was time to add the stars of the show, these dairy cow isopods, which I sprinkled into the middle of the paludarium. Along with giving the tank a few final touches, such as adding these floating plants to the branch, dotting around a few final pieces of moss. And with that, after about 3 months of work, the tank was finally finished. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for sticking around. I would be incredibly grateful if you considered subscribing to the channel. I'm going to be documenting the progress and changes of this tank, and I'm already working on episode 2 where some huge changes are underway. So be sure to stick around and I'll see you then. Until next time.